I made a short video about Joker 2 right after I left the theater, and I kind of kept it brief because I don't like going too deep right away when pretty much no one's seen the movie. And now that I've had a few days to think about it, I think that the Joker 2 is a weird movie in the sense that it seems like it hates the first one because of a narrative that I don't really buy into. And that narrative is that this movie was some heroic tale of incel violence or some nonsense. And I want to talk about this because Hollywood is a left-wing bubble. It's how you get so much nonsense that all has the same identity politics laden garbage in it. And this movie started getting that kind of weird rhetoric from the media before the movie even came out. I mean, you can see there was all these articles where the mainstream media was pretty much just begging for some kind of incel mass violence to happen at the movie. Never did, obviously. But you can see it's just absolute bullshit. And it started before the movie even came out. And this is what really drives that narrative, I think, of this being some kind of incel heroic movie. But it seems like Todd Phillips hates the audience that he thinks exists for the first Joker movie that I don't think exists at all. And it's fascinating to me to look at the politics of it, where if you switch the race of Arthur Fleck, you really have to wonder if the audience that likes this movie would be reversed. And I'm not going to read this whole article from Variety, but I do want to talk about a couple parts because it's fascinating how I think this guy, Peter DeBruge, gets it right about Joker 2, but also has the dumbass narrative about Joker 1. So he said that he hates the first one, and he talks about how it was provocative art, and it transformed the Joker into a poster boy for incels everywhere. And there's this mythology about incel violence. I don't really understand it. I'm sure that out of the millions of people that saw this movie, there's a few of those fucking freaks out there. I think 95% of people just realized it was a good movie. And something that I really want to talk about is I think that the politics that underlie both the Joker movie and Joker 2 are the same. I don't know Todd Phillips' politics. He's a Hollywood guy, so I'm assuming he's left wing. I don't know if he's super far left, a little bit left, default left. Who the hell knows? Don't really care. Something that's baked into a lot of the politics of Joker 1 is that society is responsible for what Arthur Fleck turns into. He makes his own choices, but society has put him in this position to where he's lashing out. Joker 2 also underlies this, but instead of him lashing out and being violent, it just breaks him. And it makes Joker 2 feel like a response to the audience that he thinks likes Joker 1. And it's very apparent that he hates the idea of this whole incel worship thing. But the reason the movie was appreciated the way that it was, I think, is for 90% of the audience, 95% of the audience, people can appreciate a character that just gets beaten down by life over and over again and think he's an interesting character without looking up to him. I would wager that most people would say that his actions in the movie are wrong. Even if you understand them, I think most people have that basic moral compass. And the reason the whole incel thing really annoys me is because if Arthur was played of a race by anyone else, the culture war audience, I think, would be flipped. Because then you'd have the narratives about the oppressor fighting the oppressed and the downtrodden minorities and blah, blah, blah. And because he's a white guy, people try to lump in these incels that they think exist in mass numbers. And again, you see this kind of bullshit all the time whenever there's young men involved, because the mainstream narrative by and large is that young men can't be oppressed, particularly if they're white. You see people like Jordan Peterson called an incel when he's essentially a self-help psychologist. In the first one, we see that the system is failing Arthur, both mentally, his lifestyle, the way that people treat him. You have Bruce Wayne's dad on TV saying that these people are a bunch of clowns. Again, I would call a lot of this left-wing politics, where you have the rich looking down on the poor and being pretty overtly dickish. I mean, the whole eat the rich narrative is much more of a left-wing thing, obviously. The only thing that's even sort of incel-related, if you want to call it that, is his fantasies about spending time with Sophie when he's actually a stalker. I don't think that has anything to do with like incel violence or anything like that, as much as just he's just a lonely guy. And it just seems like every person around him throughout the entire movie does not give a fuck about him. They treat him like shit. And the only kind of recourse that he can find as far as women go, or really anyone, is in his own head. Obviously, his mother abandoned him. He was neglected. A lot of the stuff that happens to him is completely out of his control. But I think the movie does a really good job of walking the line of bad things are happening to him, but the movie makes it clear to me that his behavior is still what most people would call evil. He's accountable for his decisions. And this movie, in a lot of ways, feels like a response to give you answers to all those questions that are definitive and also make it clear that they don't like the people that they envision that like the first movie. Something that just feels really vindictive to me is to undo his entire character from the first one and make sure that you know that he's a loser who shouldn't be lived up to. And even the way that it functions in the movie, in Joker 2, he gets raped. And this breaks him from being the Joker. He realizes he's just Arthur Fleck. He's a sad loser. Lady Gaga leaves him. He gets stabbed to death at the end, and he's not even the real Joker. This was something society put on him. This was not something that he inspired in society with his behavior. And that's what I meant when I said Joker 2 feels like it's still left-wing politics, but shitting on its own left-wing politics in the first one. And I would go so far as to say that Todd Phillips doesn't actually seem to understand why people liked the first movie. Like what I was talking about where bad things happen to him, but he's still accountable for his actions. This movie goes out of its way to say over and over, well, bad things happen to him, and he's just kind of a sad sack who has to deal with it. And society has put this on him, and he says this all directly in Joker 2. He didn't do this. It just feels like a complete misunderstanding of why people might like to see somebody who's beaten down by society, who things never seem to work out for, take revenge. Even if it's not moral or it's the right thing to do, it's not behavior you should aspire to, but it makes for a really interesting character for a movie. And I think the audience is smart enough on an average level to realize that and not think that it's something that should be replicated. Something that I would compare this to for people who are Star Wars fans is the Darth Bane trilogy. The first Darth Bane book in particular, he has a rough life. He's working in a mine as a slave to a corporation. He kind of feels like the war is just catching them up in it. The Jedi don't really care about him. The Sith don't really care about him. His dad's an alcoholic that beats him. He views himself as essentially a victim. But as the book goes on, there's a period where he struggles to become a Sith Lord because he doesn't know if he can commit to the dark side. And obviously, the book is called Darth Bane, so eventually he does. And at no point after that is he framed as a good guy or in the right. You just understand his worldview. And I think that's how most people felt about Joker. Like, you can understand the frustration of someone who feels like they have nothing and there's just no help anywhere they look and that there's just nowhere to go and they become desperate. I mean, at the end of this first movie, it foreshadows the whole time that he's going to kill himself on national TV for spite. And then as Murray pisses him off, he has this turn where he's like, well, why should I kill myself? You guys are the one that have done this to me. Fuck you. And that's the more vindictive route to go. That's the more spiteful route to go. Even just from a writing perspective, there's all the ambiguity of an unreliable narrator, which Joker 2 just totally whiffs on. And I think that's a really interesting character and a really interesting message. And to assume that people find a character interesting because they like him, I think it's just bullshit. I think it's insulting to the audience. And I think it's why Joker 2 feels like a big fuck you to everybody. And it turned out to be a piece of shit. And it's just really a bummer because the first one is a good movie. And Joker 2 does everything in its power to undo the first one, including resetting his character, kind of being this morphed what if. And really the what if is what if the first movie sucked a big dick. But essentially what if Arthur doesn't transform into the Joker, he's just a loser. It's kind of the what if of Joker 2. It just makes for a really miserable experience. It makes me wonder if people don't actually understand why the first one was popular. And it's just really disappointing because I actually think that there were some interesting ideas in there. I think even if you had had him struggle with being the Joker for the first part of the movie, like maybe he's back on his meds, he realizes that he killed 6 people, and then Harley Quinn is the impetus for him flipping. That could have been really interesting. And they could have had a really toxic relationship where they both make each other worse. I like that they did Harley Quinn in Joker 2 as kind of this weirdo chick that falls in love with the serial killer type. But beyond that, it's just rehashing a lot of the same shit with bad music and worse writing in a way that feels spiteful. So I'm going to leave it there for this. I just want to talk about how I think the culture war and the whole meta narrative around the first Joker movie made the second one feel spiteful and turned out the way that it did. So if you're still here, let me know what you think. I try to respond to all the comments that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe, all that shit. Thanks. See ya.